Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening on whatever date this is for you. This is the Silmarillion Film Project back in action. This is Trish Lambert, co-host for the podcast, and Dave Kale, our usual announcer, is not with us. He is Netflixing. He's, as some of you may know, he's got a job with Netflix, and he is hitting his first major deadline.
Yes.
So we wish him well, and he's been burning the midnight oil, apparently, and probably is still burning it, I would imagine. So anyway, I am here today with the Tolkien professor, Corey Olson, to do the next session of Silmarillion Film Project. Let's take it away, Corey.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. And delighted to be back here for session number 3 of our 4th season of Silm. I have to admit, I'm feeling like super warm and fuzzy about Silm this morning because after just my experience this past weekend, last weekend I was at Magnolia Moot in North Carolina, meeting with a bunch of our wonderful Signum and Mythgard folks and fantasy fans down there in down in South. And it was really cool. I just did a lot of reflecting. We talked about Silm a good bit. Marie Prosser, that is Myth Lewin from the discussion boards, was there, and she gave a talk about Silm, kind of introducing the concept and sort of talking about some of the challenges of Silm. And it was talking with her. I got to sit down with her, and we had a long talk about Silm, doing some planning for season 4, and we. I just kind of ended up talking about it with several people down there, and just sort of spending some time reflecting on how much I love this podcast. I mean, man, more and more, I have to admit that when I first thought of it, it was, well, not exactly a gimmick. I mean, I knew it would be cool. I knew it would be legitimately cool. It wasn't just gimmick suggests that there's something sort of, dishonest or something about it. And that's, of course, not what I mean. But I thought it was kind of a fun idea, but I thought of it primarily as just a hook to discuss the Silmarillion more, which... But what I've been discovering, what I've been kind of realizing and embracing lately is how much I have come to love Silm as a creative outlet. I never kind of saw that coming, actually. I have been really, really loving this project, and it is the kind of thing, I'm not really a creative writer, or at least I don't anymore consider myself a creative writer. But of course, there was a time, as I know there will be many people who will relate to this, when I was a teenager, I wrote all the time, and that's how I identified myself. I would have considered that my core identity was as a writer, and I totally put that aside a long time ago. I haven't really tried to write anything since college, basically, which is, when, as happens, I think, with many people, I sort of discovered I wasn't really that good a writer. But anyway, just that's one of the chief things that discouraged me. However, the way in which I have come to enjoy this, again, not just as a discussion project, but really as a creative project, has kind of taken me by surprise. And as I say, after some reflection on that over this weekend, it just makes me extra excited to come back and talk about this stuff with you more.
Well, now, wait. One of the things that I do remember early on when this was like a little egg,
right?
This podcast, you did say to me, I really would like this to become a community-owned project,
yes.
And how can we do that? How are we going to, and we didn't really know, and look at us now.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the way in which this is, the kind of collaboration that this has come to be with, the community who has been a part of these discussions on our discussion board is really neat. One of the things that I was kind of learning, in my discussions with Marie this past weekend, one of the things that I was sort of getting from her was a little bit more of an understanding of sort of the culture of our Silm community on the discussion boards, and it's just it's awesome to hear, to see the way in which people have come and are really have really committed to, are really loving this as a creative project themselves, and it's interesting. One of the things that was most interesting to me to learn really is that I have to admit that I did always assume that the film community, if we succeeded to build a film community, that it would be primarily it would be like sort of a niche subsection of like the podcast audience. I mean, that was kind of a natural assumption I think to make, as
right.
This was like a podcast series that I was starting. So,
Right.
but the fact that it had apparently, what Marie tells me is that, a lot of the core people in the creative community that are a part of this are not even really listeners to the podcast as a whole.
Wow.
Which I think is awesome. So I just wanted to take a moment to say, for those of you who are not listeners to my podcast, but patiently listen to these episodes so you can hear what crazy things the executive producers have to say about this stuff before you go on and carry on the hard work of the creative process. Thanks for joining us. It's awesome. I'm so glad you're here. And I want you to know how much I value, and how much we value your presence and participation in this whole process. It's really, really cool. Anyway, and Tony, I totally agree. Obviously, the way that it illuminates this whole process illuminates other writings like The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and not only the way in which it discussing these things through not only kind of helps me to understand the Silmarillion better, but it does really shine light. Tony, I agree. It helps me to see the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit material in a new light, and also I feel like it's, I don't know, being involved in, what I increasingly have come to call a creative engagement with a story, not just a readerly reception of a story, but when you're engaging creatively with something in the way that Tolkien did all the time, like The Lord of the Rings is creative engagement, or fan fiction, if you like, with, of like the stuff that Tolkien did as scholarly work. But anyway, it's engaging with Tolkien's work creatively. I feel in some ways it kind of helps me to get sort of closer to Tolkien because it's what he did, it's what he loved doing with other works, right? So it's kind of fun. And Tony, I agree. It's really interesting to integrate the non-canonical writings. I wouldn't call it second guessing Christopher Tolkien because I totally respect. I'm not second guessing Christopher Tolkien in the same way that like you second guess a baseball manager after a loss, right? Saying like, that was a stupid choice. He shouldn't have done that. I don't have any problems with the choices that Christopher Tolkien made in general. I'm sure we could find individual examples of choices I have a problem with, but in general, I don't object to the choices that Christopher Tolkien made when he published the Silmarillion. I think it's a completely defensible approach to the posthumous publication of the Silmarillion, which presented some very serious problems, and he did it. And again, I think that the way that he did it, it's hard to get up in arms, I think, about that. However, the choice that he made was to leave aside, he chose not to do the work that would be required in integrating some of his father's later ideas. Tolkien had all these ideas later in life, which would have required some pretty major changes to the Silmarillion story that he had written. And he didn't get a chance to do those. And in general, Christopher Tolkien said, I'm not going to do that. Right? I'm not going to go back. If I have to rewrite a huge section of the Silmarillion in order to accommodate this idea, I'm not going to do that because then it will be too much of me and too little of my father. Right? So again, totally respectable decision on Christopher Tolkien's part. But it's kind of fun to do, though, right? I mean, to sort of take some of these later ideas and say, no, we really want to think these through, and we really want to integrate these things. Yeah. And Tony, you're right. We do also get to go back. There are some things that Christopher said that he felt were mistakes in retrospect, and that he would have changed. So yeah, we do get a chance to do some of those things too. But again, to me, that's sort of small compared to the much bigger projects of kind of taking and working some of these things through after the fact. Anyway, So, sorry, brief editorial here at the beginning about how much I love this project and how excited I am to continue through with season 4 here. So, the topic of today's session is the frame narrative. And the frame narrative was something that we decided on at the very beginning, and which I still really love the idea of. And just a brief reminder as to why the heck we do this and what on earth is going on here. The idea was to have a frame for a couple different reasons. One was that we wanted to give a kind of point of contact. One of the point of this of doing the Silmarillion, you know, the part of the concept of doing an adaptation of the Silmarillion is not just because the stories in the Silmarillion are awesome and would make really good TV. The point also is we want to show the way in which the First Age connects with the Third Age. That's really important, I think, in the bigger picture of the whole story. And in some ways also it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of true to the process, right? Tolkien's process, true to the birth of these stories, in the sense that the way in which it is the putting down of roots into the older mythology that really gave The Lord of the Rings the depth that it had. And anyway, I just want to, I want to establish that connection. I want to make sure that we always we're encouraging people to kind of be looking back and forth. I also, part of the thing I think that which initially suggested the idea of the frame narrative is to kind of, it's another one of those examples of sort of fulfilling one of Tolkien's ideas, right? Tolkien's initial concept for the Silmarillion was that they would be stories that are told to a later narrator so there's the frame story of the narrator, and of course here I'm thinking of the Book of Lost Tales, the narrator, the human narrator who goes to Tolaresia and meets the elves and learns their history and brings those stories that he hears and then puts together back to the world, right? And that's how we get them, basically. That was kind of part of the initial concept in the Book of Lost Tales. But again, I think here the important concept, which we can see there from that very beginning of Tolkien's attempt to write this kind of mythology, it's essentially tied up with that from the start, was this idea of taking these stories of the ancient days and bringing them into the later world, right? So that connection between the old and the new, the way in which it is important to the new world for it to be grounded in the stories of the old world. I mean, those kinds of things go back to the very beginning, and so I really was excited to see if we could work with that, if we could play with that. So anyway, those were some of the things. Now, as far as the frame itself is concerned, here I forgot to do announcements. Darn it! I'm just jumping into the frame. Wait 1 second. I will get back to the concepts of the frame that we've used. I interrupt this discussion briefly to do the announcements that I forgot to do, and only 2 quick announcements. First, TextMoot is coming up January 19th, but more urgently, the call for papers deadline for TextMoot is actually tomorrow, November 17th. So if you want to submit a paper for TextMoot, definitely get right on that. TextMoot is going to be great. It's going to be down in Waco, Texas, January 19th, the next of our regional moots, which have all just been absolutely fantastic, wonderful experiences. So I hope if you're anywhere...
I submitted.
Yeah, you submitted? Awesome. Good. I was hoping you would submit.
Yep,
Looking forward to seeing you there, Trish. Awesome.
Yep.
Very cool. Very cool. So TextMoot going to be great. I hope you can people can be involved with that. So please do keep that in mind. And the Mythgard Movie Club. So the Mythgard Movie Club is our monthly discussion. They meet once a month. They discuss both new and old films, of fantasy and science fiction films. Really great to have a place where we're sort of dedicated to talking about films. We don't get to do that much in the Mythgard Academy series, but it's a really great outlet. They're doing voting for which films they covered during the course of 2019. So go to mythgard.org/MCC 2019, and it will get you to the voting page to nominate and cast your votes for particular movies. So, all right. Those are my announcements. Now back to the frame. So, Hakan did a really good... And by the way, I just would like to... So in my, retrospective and affectionate mood that I am in thinking about film this week, I want to particularly thank Hakan for all the work that he has done. Hakan has been, Marie and Nick have been, leading our script discussions and things, and so they've gotten a fair bit of mic time, and sort of glory during the course of this process. Hakan has been such a rock throughout this whole process, really, really crucial to the whole thing. So Hakan, I just wanted to thank you so much for all the work that you've done. I really, really appreciate it. Anyway, so Hakan provides this excellent sort of synopsis of where we've been, right? He says, we've used the frame in a couple of ways, moving from a storyteller model to a frame that is a mirror or set in contrast to the main story. And the extremes of that were in Season 1 and Season 3, right? Season 1, we had young Aragorn in Rivendell actually being instructed. So we had the early, with the early stuff, the how the world was created and the initial conflict between the Valar and stuff being essentially taught to Aragorn by Elrond in Rivendell. And then in Season 3, we had the teenage Aragorn storyline where he was kind of where his story was being set essentially in parallel to Feanor's story, sort of showing the sort of the parallels and the anti-parallels there, and the sort of the lessons that that Aragorn was using. But we had very little explicit connection. That is, we did not have a real teller of stories, so we had Elrond who was telling these stories to young Estelle in Season 1 and Season 3. We were just kind of running the stories in parallel. Hakan says the first model tends to become a kind of children's book presentation, which I think most of us want to avoid. The second type is more difficult, though. If it's very dramatic, it risks stealing focus from the main story or making things confusing, and a less dramatic frame could feel boring. Yes. I think of the 3 seasons we've done, I think Season 2 most interestingly walked the middle line here, where we had a story, which was the story of Arwen in Lothlorien and her kind of, existential deliberations about where elves belong as she is being confronted with the whole dynamic of it's the late Third Age and elves are leaving Middle-earth. But of course, she's asking, is that even the right thing? Are we right to do this? Which, of course, has an important relevance for Arwen. We know later on this is obviously pre-meeting Arwen. So there's not really a question of joining him and becoming mortal yet, but of course we're sort of we were foreshadowing that in the frame. And there I think we did have a kind of middle ground where it wasn't just like we had the lecturer and the story listener, right? Like we did in Season 1, but we also still had actually encountering people telling stories who were there, right? We had Celeborn, who could tell the stories from Cuiviénen. We had Galadriel, who could tell the stories from Valinor. There I think we did... we succeeded more, I think, in kind of a middle ground. And I'm willing to agree that the sort of the 2 extremes of those models, the Season 1 and the Season 3 might be too extreme. But I would give one caveat. I'm not sure I totally agree about the sort of children's book presentation. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, of course, for it to be that way, but I don't think that's inescapable at all. I mean, again, that's the model that's the model in the Book of Lost Tales. You know, the model of the Book of Lost Tales is like the dude who goes around and has lots of other people tell him stories. And I don't think that has to become too like, well, first of all, I guess I'm trying to unpack a little bit what children's book presentation exactly means. Too preachy, too sort of simplistic. I don't think that like somebody being told stories need necessarily be very infantilizing, either to the character or to the audience necessarily. Again, I kind of like the Arwen frame as a model in the sense that something was happening, so it wasn't just like I am the learner and you are the teacher and I am and let's just like hear so we'll start every episode with the beginning of your lecture, right? and then you launch into your story. That's of course not how we did season 1 anyway, but still, we weren't doing that. There was a real plot, but the real plot was simply Arwen wanting to know, right? Arwen herself trying to solve this and figure out a problem. And of course, she comes to an answer which is not necessarily the same answer that everybody in the season comes to, right? So it's not just like she's being used as a kind of artifice to draw attention to the moral of the story or something like that. It doesn't quite work like that either. But as I say, I like the sort of balance between there being something that's happening in the frame, like there's an actual plot arc of the frame, but it doesn't have to be a big dramatic, exciting plot arc. Again, like that's the thing that season 2 and that the Book of Lost Tales have in common. The thing that primarily drives, like the core of the plot arc of the frames in both the Book of Lost Tales and in our season 2 Arwen frame was the desire of the protagonist to know, right? So, and that I think is fine. I think it's a good model in general. So I would like, my goal for the frame would be to shift it back a little bit more towards season 2, and to kind of try to find that middle ground again. Because, of course, again, another thing that, at least conceptually, the Arwen frame accomplished was drawing attention to this sort of central theme of the season, right? Again, not in a sort of a crude or belaboring way, but it helps to foreground, like, this is the thing that's at issue. When you hear the people in the frame talking about these sort of central concerns, it's easier to kind of stay focused in on that. Yeah.
This is really embarrassing. I'm having a complete blackout. What's our frame for season 3?
Remember that was Aragorn and meeting Hamilcar, the son of
right.
Halbarad, and all that
Can't
stuff.
believe I forgot that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Oh, and hey, Hakan, I see your posts on the Twitch channel. I do follow those as well. The discussion tends to focus more on the GoToWebinar one because it's real time and the Twitch is delayed. So, like, if I ask a question, I want to get a response and I want to have to wait for like 30 seconds. But anyway, yeah. But I see it, and I know there are some other people here too. Okay, so anyway, so I think finding that balance, it seems to me that, if I therefore had to list, like, what are the most important things that a frame should accomplish for our story, high on that list would be spotlighting, and not necessarily belaboring, of course, but spotlighting the primary themes and concerns of the seasons, serving as in that way a kind of framing thematically, therefore, as well as sort of practically or narratively the Silmarillion stories that we're going through in that season. I think it also helps to establish some of the kinds of parallels that we were talking about. I mean, this has come up quite a bit, and I think is only going to come up more as we move through. Tolkien's imagination fundamentally goes to these kinds of, what I have in the past called typological relationships, right? Where you've got one story that happens in the later story, which is very much like the story that happened in the earlier story. We get these very direct parallels, and the same stories kind of recapitulating themselves again and again over time. That's a strong feature of Tolkien's storytelling, and I personally love that feature of Tolkien's storytelling, and I really want to integrate that element into our Silmarillion adaptation. And the frame, again, I think, provides us some interesting opportunities to do that. Cool. So I agree with David Atlee's point. He says he'd actually love to use the children's story model at some point, having Sam tell the story of a nine-fingered Frodo and the Ring of Doom to little Eleanor would be charming, and I'm sure we could find a way to make it interesting. Yeah, David, of course, I am immediately tempted by the comic potential of that, right? I can imagine, having a frame story in which, like, basically have the primary action of the episode be, like, some of the most tragical, horrifying, and like soul-searing content, and then but frame that, like, with, like, Sam telling his kids, right, in a way which doesn't pull punches, but it would be kind of funny to sort of set that up. It would be hard for me to resist at all points the comedy potential of that, I think. But storyteller Sam, I do think that needs to happen sooner or later. But right now we've been maintaining. We've been maintaining our frames as we've been maintaining the chronology of our frames. Right now, our frames have been in the Third Age, in that time between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. That's kind of so far the general framework of our frames, chronological framework of our frames. I'm kind of thinking we would probably want to say it would be interesting to continue the frames when we get to Third Age material, to shift that forward and be doing post Lord of the Rings frames for the Lord of the Rings material. That's where I feel like that would really come in. But it would be, we'll see at what point we decide we want to transition, but I'm really kind of thinking that we're going to want to stay in that, pre-War of the Ring era, throughout our, whole First Age stuff here. But, well, Marie, I agree that there's a certain amount of spoiler content, right, in the frame. And that is, as Marie's pointing out, right, that, like, having storyteller Sam used as a frame in The Lord of the Rings, like, gives away the fact that, like, Sam's going to survive, right? And that's true, but I'm okay with that, actually. I don't find that piece of, like, mystery, like, in as much as is Sam going to live or not a mystery in the book, like, giving that away, I think is fine, actually. I'm not too troubled. I'm not too troubled by that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not that much different than, telling a story from a first-person perspective, right? Which gives you a pretty shrewd idea that the narrator probably survives. I mean, there have been authors who have played with that, obviously, but yeah. No, Marie, I agree. There are definitely some things that we can do in the frame to kind of manipulate the whole spoiler element, right? Frodo's absence, I agree, Marie, is one of the biggest ones there, right? But anyway, yeah. Now, Huck and I agree we could go a little bit further down that road and say it could be Sam's kids telling the story. Yes. Thinking of sort of the status that, the Fair Barons had in later years, right? That would make for some interesting telling there. I could definitely see that. But fortunately, we'll have several seasons to choose from there when we're telling those bits of the story. Anyway, yeah, cool. Yeah, Phil says, would this fit in with the discarded epilogue? Essentially, yeah. I wouldn't want to bring in the epilogue directly, but yeah, the epilogue concept from The Lord of the Rings, the Sam telling stories to his kids thing, would...
well, one thing you could do is have Sam tell the Hobbit story.
Right, yeah.
And then I like the idea of a later generation with the Red Book of Westmarch telling a story to children.
Mm-hmm. Yep, lots of potential there.
Anyway.
Yeah. But
off topic.
These are all distant concerns. As I think we definitely want to stick to pre-Lord of the Rings for all of this material. I don't think we don't want to play our like the Fourth Age hand too soon here. Yeah. Tony says he wants Bilbo telling that story to young Sam. Yeah, there's definitely an attraction there too. Though I'd be tempted to not have Bilbo as the narrator of I mean, it's really tempting to do that, but I'm not sure I want to do that. Want to have Bilbo actually be the narrator, the frame narrator of the.
Well, don't we still have the same issue there that we did with Sam telling the story of Lord of the Rings? If he's telling a Hobbit story, we know he survived.
Right. Yes. But I mean, I think it would be interesting to. I mean, obviously, we need to play with the multiple editions. That's going to be really fun, actually. But anyway, that's a concern for 15 years from now. For now, we need to focus on. We need to focus on this. And by the way, and I would add, as David Atlee was just pointing out, I actually think that Bilbo telling stories to young Sam is going to come much sooner, I think. I want young Gamgee hearing stories about elves, sir, exactly as David was just suggesting. Crazy about stories of the old days he is, we are told about Sam, right? And so I want to show Sam hearing some of these stories about the old days. It will be, so whether it's well, there are lots of options, right?
Okay, so before we move on, just one last thing, and I know we're off topic, but I have to say this because you said the thing about playing with the different versions. We could even have a little Easter egg of Christopher Tolkien as a little boy, right? Wait, Bilbo, you told it differently yesterday or last week. You said it was this. Gollum said this, and now you're saying,
right.
You'd have to really know your Tolkien history to get that one.
Right, exactly.
All right, I won't think about this again for 15 years.
Exactly, yeah. We're putting this on a very distant back burner, a very, very slow cook, because in the meantime we've got a lot of first stage to cover here. But that's very good. We'll definitely think about that. Yeah, actually now lots of people are suggesting what Bilbo could tell young Sam. That, at least I agree, is more immediately, immediately, he says. Only like 5 years from now. Hakan is suggesting maybe the story of the third kinslaying, that is the destruction of the settlement around the Bay of Balar. Marie suggests the tale of Gil-galad, which is certainly an attractive option, thinking of Sam's recitation of that poem. David had suggested maybe Gondolin and the Fall of Gondolin. Any of those could, as long as it's about elves, I think it could work. The only thing I would say is it would have to have that quality which inspires the sort of awe that we see Sam having, right? But anyway, yeah. So okay, let's keep going. All right. So specific, concrete suggestions for season 4 frame. we had two suggested plans. The second plan was about Bilbo in the Shire, learning the history of the elves, with Lobelia's theft of his silver spoons standing in for the Silmarils and the kinslaying. Now, as I was just saying, that one of the the primary function that I would like for the frame to have is to help us to really spotlight the overall themes of the season. And if so if the theme of the season is going to be reconciliation and forgiveness, the idea of having Bilbo and the Sackville Bagginses be at the core of that is kind of funny. But I'm not sure it isn't too funny, right? That is, like, I wouldn't want to make a farce of it, and that it would seem a little farcical, to have, like, Bilbo holding, like, deep resentment about the theft of his silver spoons and stuff. Honestly, it kind of feels to me that, like, the Bilbo in the Shire suggestion for the frame of this season is, I don't know, perhaps born out of desperation, that we've kind of wanted to bring Bilbo into the frame for a long time. From the beginning, we've wanted Bilbo to be a frame narrator, and we keep promising ourselves we're going to get there, and we keep never doing it. So I think, to me, that's kind of what I'm hearing there. I'm kind of hearing, gosh, I really want to have Bilbo and the Shire be the frame at last. Let's think of a way we can make this work. And I'm not saying that we couldn't make it work, but I don't. This doesn't seem to me the moment, especially in light of the wonderful suggestion that Zephin12 was making. Zephin is so smart, has made so many wonderful suggestions in exploring the Lord of the Rings as well, and says, what if we were to follow someone in Erebor/Dale/ the Woodland Realm shortly after the Battle of Five Armies? Love this. This is absolutely perfect. I hadn't thought of this at all. I mean, we've been thinking of these between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings plot lines, and I hadn't even considered the sort of greater Erebor region angle. This is, like, almost indescribably perfect. Mike, Amy's Revenge, says maybe even Thranduil, Bard, and Dan in their cups, telling tales, standing an overnight vigil over Thorin to express themes of forgiveness, working past grievances, and rebuilding. Yeah, something like that. Again, this doesn't have to be a one-off incident, I think. I don't think we need to have, like, this one meeting between the bunch of them in which, like, a number of stories get told, and so that, like, we're basically sort of stretching out this one single incident or single meeting over the course of the whole season, having each frame moment be like, oh yeah, and do you remember the time when, we could do that, but I don't think we need to do that. I think this is as soon as I heard this suggestion, I was like, boom! I mean, it was just blowing up in my mind. There's so many things that we can do. I really want... So first of all, obviously, with the theme of reconciliation, that's really, really rich here, right? Because on the one hand, of course, things are reconciled at the end of the Battle of Five Armies, right? The Battle of Five Armies kind of does the job, but we can't forget about the fact that there are literally shots fired between the dwarves and the elves and the men before the goblins come in, right? Gandalf stops them in mid-charge but they've like, arrows have been shot on both sides. It is almost certain that there are, like, dwarves who were killed by elves before the Battle of the Five Armies began, and that's, yes, the Battle of Five Armies happened, and it kind of solved problems, but, like, we know how dwarves are, right? There have to be dwarves living in Erebor who are still bearing a grudge for their kinsman who was killed by elf arrows before the Battle of Five Armies began. Like, that's got to be a thing. And at the same time, and then, of course, needless to say, there's still the whole imprisonment thing. I mean, remember Thorin's open grudge, right? His remembering the Elven King with little friendship there at the gates, right? And how he doesn't want to talk to the Elven King at all, and feels kind of upset for what he considers wrongful imprisonment, which, he kind of has a case. I can see the Elven King's point, but, I can easily see Thorin's point as well. Thorin's dead and everything is kind of forgotten, and Dan does not personally have the kind of grudge that that Thorin had. I mean, Diana's never seen the inside of the Elf King's prison, but anyway, there are still others who have, right? There's still plenty of survivors who have, and it would not be hard for us to choose one or two members of Thorin's company, right, who still remember the Elven King with small love, right? And again, thinking about the themes that we talked about before, it's perfect, so perfect. The themes that we talked about before about reconciliation and forgiveness, and the difference between reconciliation and forgiveness, right? There has been reconciliation, but has there really been forgiveness between the elves and the dwarves? The elves might have agreed to sort of leave the dwarves in peace and bring their armies back home after the Battle of Five Armies, but, do they still look down on the dwarves? I remember the Elven King's comment to Bilbo in chapter 16, and when he says, I know more perhaps about dwarves in general than you do, right? And urges him not to go back. Now, he's kind of justified in this, right? He's not wrong about Thorin and how Thorin is likely to react, right, when Bilbo comes back and admits that he's the one who gave up the Arkenstone. But at the same time, like, what lies behind that? The kind of real looking down on dwarves. And I know it's always funny to talk about looking down on dwarves, but clearly in more than one sense, Thranduil looks down on dwarves, right? So again, it's one thing to say, I will reconcile with these guys in the sense of, like, I will, play nice, and we can kind of agree to work together. It's a different thing for there to be real, like, community among them, right? And so there's lots of opportunity for tension there in the Erebor region, and that tension providing numerous parallels for our season 4 activities, and I think that's really cool. David Attlee says, The Hobbit gives us a gift for this frame in the person of Bard. I imagine both elves and dwarves holding spectacular grudges, and they can both be humbled by learning forgiveness from the men. Yeah, the Bard's angle on this is interesting, and I do agree that he would be the one who would be the sort of peacekeeping force, I think. I would even, by the way, see him as hosting this. Like, the meeting would physically happen in Dale. Both because it'd be fun to show Dale, and secondly because, again, like, the Elven King is not going to want to go into the mountain, not being sure if he's going to come out again, right? Are we going to do a turnabout on this whole unjust imprisonment thing? He's got to be thinking. And the dwarves are going to be like, I'm not going through his magic doors again. So Bard would clearly host it, right? So yeah. Now, one of the things, though, that we need, if we are going to, so several issues here. First, let's think a little bit more about the occasion. I think the idea of having this be, another thing I like about Mike's suggestion there is that this is a sort of a commemorative moment, right? A commemorative moment of the battle, right? So this could be something like, what would it be? 5th year? 7th year? I kind of like 7th year anniversary. I kind of like that because we tend in the modern world to celebrate like in units of 5s, right? Like the 5-year anniversary, the 10-year anniversary, the 25-year anniversary. For elves to be counting in 7s or 12s seems like it would be kind of, yeah, I know, I was thinking of 12, but 12 I think is too long. I don't know that we don't want to wait until 12, because the 12-year anniversary of the Battle of Five Armies would be after Aragorn and Arwen's meeting, right? And I don't think we want to just totally skip over that without any. Yeah, exactly, Marie. I want it to be before Aragorn turns 20. So that's why I'm thinking 7, because he was 16. Didn't we have him 16 in the season 3 thing? So we'd just be 1 year later, still moving forward. Marie, you're right. We could decide that the dwarves memorialize 7s. Sure.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the dwarves call it. The dwarves want to hold a 7-year, a sort of a feast and celebration. For the memorial for the 7.
It's also memorializing Thorin as well, right?
Yeah. For the dwarves, that would be a big part of the angle.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Of course, but everyone else would acknowledge that. And first of all, not only would they all be willing to commemorate Thorin, but it's a big moment. Like for the Men of Dale, it's also an anniversary of the founding of Dale, right? And
true.
And their liberation. For the and for the elves, it's it was still a great victory.
For the elves, it was a big economic, boom.
Right, exactly.
More wine down the river, yay!
Yeah. More wine down the river. Absolutely. Yes. The vineyard keepers of Dorwinion are particularly celebrating.
Oh, yeah. Particularly happy.
Yeah,
yes, absolutely.
Okay. Can we have, if we do, it seems like it's going to be hard for us to avoid drunkenness at all points, right? I mean, if this is going to be a memorial celebration, we have to have at least one frame scene in which people are getting completely sloshed, right? And would it be too much to ask for a scene in which, I'm like kind of imagining like Bard and Thranduil and Legolas, like, walking down a hallway, sort of weaving around and singing.
So I assume we're going with the Hobbit elves get drunk as opposed to the Jackson elves don't get drunk.
That's ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah, there's no justification for Peter Jackson's elves don't get drunk thing. It's just absolutely absurd.
Yeah, so in that case, the week down the hall.
Yeah, so we have them staggering down a hallway singing the rolling down the hole song. Like, can we do that? Like heave ho, splash, plump. Is that too much to ask? I don't know if that's too much to ask.
Brandon will keep getting the words wrong. And
yes. A rousing chorus of tra-la-la-lally, David. Absolutely.
And the problem is I can't get Lee Pace's Thranduil in my head in picturing this scene, right, with the crown. I mean, just, gets it hung up on a sconce or something.
Yeah, the casting of Thranduil is going to be really interesting.
Oh my gosh, that's right. We'd have to cast him.
Yeah.
And Legolas too. We haven't cast.
Yeah,
Legolas
we have to cast Legolas. We'd have some serious long-term implications for the casting of that.
Oh my gosh.
We could get rid of Legolas if we wanted to. I mean, Legolas could be off doing something. We just have to invent an excuse to not have Legolas on screen if we wanted that. We could also bring him in. I mean, that's we could make that choice. So that itself will be an interesting discussion if we want to have.
Well, if we get somebody that if we get somebody with the same genes as Elijah Wood, who doesn't look any different today, then we'll be good.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. We make it part of our casting call, right? All we need is somebody who can promise not to visibly age for the next 20 years. That's it.
We need to test your DNA for this part. Please spit into this little thing here.
Yeah. Now, both Tony and Marie are making the same argument simultaneously, saying that since the strong wine of Dorwinion, which puts the butler and the captain of the guard to sleep, very quickly, is designed for the king's table, then Legolas would have been drinking this stuff for a really long time. So he's probably built up a killer tolerance to alcohol.
That's true. As with Thranduil, I assume. Right.
Yeah. Maybe. Not sure I buy it, actually. But yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
the other thing is it's like really strong for the elves. Do they water it down to sell it to men? That's a whole another topic, probably.
it is. It is. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I can't see the name of the person who said this yet. Sometimes the names are slow to pop up, but the suggestion, I'm okay with a perpetually drunk Thranduil.
That could explain
Oh, that was
so
Marie,
much.
yeah. Yeah.
That explains so much,
Exactly.
actually.
It really would. So now Margaret asks a very sensible question, which is Bilbo coming to the party? Now, we could stretch a point, and we know that Bilbo has made trips to the Lonely Mountain. Now, he mentions that when we meet him in Rivendell, he says that when he went to he saw Dale again, but old Balin had gone away. I want to have Balin involved here. This needs to be before Balin's trip out. I think we'll want to be planting the seeds for Balin's trip into Moria. In fact, I have a little bit of a temptation to give Balin a kind of just a touch of a what's his name, Baldur moment, right?
Oh yeah.
To have Balin, at this event, basically like pledging that he's gonna do it. Right, it doesn't happen still for a while, and I'm not saying that we want, but to reduce Balin's trip to Moria to merely like a rash, like he got drunk one night and said he would do it, and then wakes up the next morning and is like, "Crap, I'm stuck with this." Like, I'm not saying that I want to reduce it to that at all. What I'm saying rather is to have him maybe, when his inhibitions have been reduced slightly, finally confessing his desire and making a pledge to do it, which he's going to hold to, right? But like he's never spoken openly of it until this. This is the first time that he speaks openly of it and says that it's going to happen, even though he knows it's not going to happen for a while.
I got a couple of ideas here. Okay. First of all, I would assume that so the frame that we're going to do through the entire season isn't just going to be one night, nor would this memorial thingy be just one day, right? It would be It would stretch over some time. So we could actually develop this whole Balin thing in pieces, right? Yes. Where it becomes really clear that he's earnest about this, because it crops up at different points in the frame story. The second thing is we could stretch Bilbo a different direction, which is why on Earth wouldn't some dwarves show up at his door to escort him to Erebor for this big 7-year festival, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, He could have, I know in the book he didn't go, but we could stretch it that direction to say he was escorted to Erebor specifically for this memorial.
Right.
And that could put him there.
I don't think
before his birthday. Yeah, before the birthday.
I don't think that giving Bilbo an extra trip to Erebor, especially this early on, this is still, so we're talking about 7 years after the events of The Hobbit. So it's still 53 years before the events of The Lord of the Rings are going to begin. So the fact we don't know that much about what happened back then, right? It's and as long as nothing like life changing
Amazon show comes out, when Amazon show comes out,
exactly. It's not like it's not like it's not like as long as we don't change anything, this can't have a massive impact on Bilbo's life necessarily.
Right.
And Tony is reminding me of a conversation that he and I had at Magnolia Moot this past weekend, where we were talking about sort of theorizing about sort of two different phases of Bilbo's life. Like the question that Tony originally asked that he and I were discussing in one of the breaks at Magnolia Moot was, where does Bilbo get his elvish lore, right? There doesn't seem to be much evidence that he actually visited Rivendell itself many times. Does he talk to elves in the Shire? What does he do? And so my response to that was saying, I don't see any reason to think why Bilbo might not have gone to Rivendell multiple times. We don't know for a fact that he didn't. But I did add that the one odd thing about that is that Frodo has obviously never been to Rivendell, right? So if popping over to Rivendell once every few years was a standard part of Bilbo's, life, you'd think that he'd have taken Frodo once or twice, at least, right, in the time that Frodo's been living with him. And this led Tony and I to speculate about the possibility of there being really kind of two phases of Bilbo's post-Hobbit career in the Shire. The first, in which we know he's pretty much a loner. Remember that reference to how he never had any really close friends until some of his younger nephews began to grow up, right? So until Frodo's generation comes through, Bilbo's still kind of a loner. So Tony and I were like, this would actually really fit to say, yeah, so during Bilbo's early period, he travels around still quite a bit. Goes to Rivendell, we can have him go to Erebor, right? It's fine. And then once that younger generation begins to grow up and he begins to be, he basically shifts from being the sponge absorbing as much of this lore and learning as many things as he can to now I'm going to be the teacher, right? Now I'm going to pass these things along to the younger generation. And we see him doing things like making up the obvious teaching poem about Gilgalad that he taught to young Sam, right? And which young Sam memorized exactly as I think Bilbo meant him to do, right? Possibly assigned him to do, in fact. So yeah, to me, that would really work, I think. So anyway, the point is, though, we're still well within the framework there, right? 7 years after The Hobbit. So yeah, what do you guys think? So people who are listening, do you want Bilbo there? Well, okay, so I'll ask that question and let you guys answer. In the meantime, let me think about what would be the benefits of, apart from its being awesome, what would be the benefits of having Bilbo there? One benefit that I can immediately think of, I think that Bilbo could be I'm not saying he's absolutely needed for this purpose, but one benefit I think that would come from having Bilbo there is having him be sort of a voice for reconciliation, right? Reconciliation, and forgiveness, right? Like, not only let's get together and agree not to kill each other, but let's actually establish a community of peace and harmony. That's not really a culture that most of these other people are part of, right? The dwarves certainly don't have that as a primary cultural feature, right? Nor really do the elves. The elves are perfectly willing just to live aloof from people. So this idea of hey, let's join in community with the local folks, that's not what elves always do. How many people in the Shire even know that there are elves that like living and traveling straight through the Shire? Most of them never even see them. And the elves are fine to leave it so. So elves are actually historically not very good at living in community with their neighbors. So it's not going to come. That's not the impetus for that. It's not going to really come from the dwarves for forgiveness and community and real community. That's not going to come from the dwarves. It's not going to come from the elves. We could make that come from Bard. We could just make that a thing that he insists on. But I think it would be really kind of fun to have. It would be really kind of fun to have Bilbo there as a sort of a voice for that, and kind of Bilbo supporting Bard in that way. Because also remember, Bard's character, as we saw it, he's not exactly the most warm and fuzzy guy, right? And it would be a little bit weird for Bard with the grim voice and the pessimistic outlook, to suddenly be the one who is come, my friends, let us all forgive each other and live in harmony. It's again, I'm not saying it's impossible. We could totally do it, but Bilbo could be handy for that. I don't think we need Bilbo either. Need would be a strong word, right? I'm just thinking instead of would he be useful? What I would want to make sure of, let me be even more explicit. I wouldn't want to bring Bilbo in just for a kind of either comic relief or for, just sort of empty-headed fan service, you know, in the sense of like, hey, here's Bilbo, and that's cool, right? If he's there, he would need a real role, a really important role. Marie, exactly. I agree with you about Eregion as a counterexample of elves living in community with their neighbors. But that's kind of the exception that proves the rule, right? The fact that everybody, like, it's commented on, right, that Eregion was a major exception. Like, that was not usual. That's exactly sort of my point. Yeah.
Well, I would think Bilbo would take part in the storytelling, story swapping, and he'd keep them honest.
Yeah.
You know, like, didn't quite go down that way, Dwalin.
Yeah.
You know.
And, actually, okay. Yeah, Trish, that's a wonderful point. Bilbo is the story lover, right?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Both the lover of telling stories and the lover of hearing stories. And especially if we set Bilbo up, Tony, along the lines that you and I were talking about, you know, he's still in his, you know,
early phase.
Early phase. His like, I want to learn all the lore of the old days that I can, right? I'm going around because like someday I'm going to edit the Silmarillion, man. So like, and I'm going to translate it, you know, for the Hobbits. So, you know, this is a research field trip for me as much as it is, you know, so. Because one of the things, if we want to have a real storytelling dynamic, that is not just them telling stories about the Battle of the Five Armies, but them thinking back to the stories of the first age, to the season 4 material. Right. Bilbo could be a really cool impetus for that, right? He could be the one who keeps bringing them back to history, right? And it would make most sense. It would be frankly awkward for, you know, like, Thranduil and, you know, Dwalin to be having an argument, right? And have one of them be like, okay, well, you're totally wrong. And I'm going to prove you're wrong, Dwalin, by telling you the story of, like, that time back in Doria. I mean, that would be just kind of weird. But Bilbo, of course, has this much more natural kind of, like, wait a second, didn't something like this happen before? You know, like, isn't there somebody tell me the story of the, like, I'm really interested in this story. He's
going to have ink smudged fingers and have his quilling pen, you know, quilling paper with him all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, yeah. The more I'm thinking that, the more I really like the way that Bilbo would make the whole storytelling angle much more natural. Yeah, because they're not going to tell stories to each other, but they might both tell stories to Bilbo.
Right, and also that sort of sets the thing because he is pretty fixated on this book. I mean, you know, it's not like said a whole bunch, but you kind of see it in retrospect. Right. You know, when you get it from him, that, gosh, you know, to put that together, that he had to be pretty, like, obsessed about gathering the lore together and writing it. So this is perfect.
Exactly.
Opportunity.
Yeah. Okay, no, I like that. All right, I'm totally talking myself into Bilbo now.
All right, I won my salary. Yay!
That's it. That's good. Yeah, that's good. Now, I still would want to make Bard the kind of reconciling force, but again, personality-wise, it doesn't seem to me like he'd be the one who would be. I mean, he is enough of a, like, you know, I am tough but also fair, you know, kind of element to him that I could see him making some strong arguments for saying, you know, look, you guys need to let this stuff go, right? I mean, I could see him showing some tough love to both the elves and the dwarves to try to bring them around. Yeah.
I love this because we get to see Bard. You know, we get to see Bard.
Yes.
Besides
developing
in the
Bard's
story.
character would be very cool. And 7 years, we should get his kid too, right?
Oh yeah, he'd be like a little boy. I mean, you know, he'd be little, right?
Yeah. He would still be young. I mean, it depends on if we want to have him born before or after, you know, the battle.
Right.
We don't know how old Bard is at the time of the battle, of course, but he's obviously not. It's not like
I always thought he was kind of in his 30s, I guess.
Yeah, me too. So yeah.
Well, that's true. I mean, his kid could be a teenager, you know, at the time. I wouldn't put him past teen years, but yeah.
No, I don't think I would either. We would continue the
Well,
trend
so we put him
of.
in he'd probably be in his early 40s by this time, and I mean, so they'd be the age maybe of one of your sons.
Yeah, yeah, but see, that would put us also in the perpetuating the bizarre cycle of Tolkien's mortal men waiting, like mortal kings and leaders waiting forever to procreate. Um, like by medieval standards, like why it is that, I mean, it was Chris Pearson who first pointed this out to me. I'd never really thought about it before, but Chris Pearson who pointed out, um, like, why on earth does Theodred have no heir? He has no excuse. The dude is in his 30s when he dies. Like, and he's not even married. Like, shame
Or not
on him.
married.
Shame on Theodred for not being married and having kids before he's 30. Like, if Theoden's line dies out, it's his fault. Come on, he's not doing his job as the heir.
True.
Like
that's
Aemir, Edred, Faramir, like all of them are
Faramir
unmarried.
and Boromir both they're all bachelors.
Yes. There was at least talk about getting Boromir married, but I mean, about time. I mean, it's like, seriously, like these dudes should be turning out kids before they're 20. You know, like
That's true.
Time's
That's
a wasting, folks. But anyway, yeah. So, but again, by having Bard having kids, I mean, I didn't have, my oldest son Nicholas was not born until I was almost 30. So, which again, in medieval terms, is like, true. Waiting until my middling years to begin having.
Well, we also want to, because it's Brand isn't it his son or his grandson
it's his grandson, Brand. Yeah, Bane is his son. Yeah.
That's right. So maybe he is. Maybe he should be in his like 20s.
Yeah, we can have him be.
And it's a merit to talk about now because he'd be in this frame. So yeah. And true, he doesn't get any play because he's long gone by the time the Lord of the Rings comes along.
You're right. Yeah. Sorry, I was just on this. Something like, hey, we could like Ben could get married. Like we could marry him off. Why not?
And use this celebration as a great time to do it.
We could throw a wedding. So there's a wedding we could throw if you wanted to do a wedding. If it came up, if we decided in a particular episode that a wedding frame might be kind of fun.
Well, we are going to be doing Celeborn and Galadriel's relationship, right? In this season.
Are going to have some wedding issues there. Now, Marie is thinking that Ban would be a child. I can see that. I mean, I can easily imagine, especially like, again, like Bard hardly seemed like the life of the party, when he was living in Esgaroth. So like, it's not hard for me to imagine that Bard would have had a hard time finding dates. And it's not like he was a leader or a king, who needed an heir. Well, this is true.
It wasn't that he needed an heir at all. Right.
Exactly. I mean, so the idea that, Bard only became, the most eligible bachelor in Rovanian after the Battle of Five Armies makes a lot of sense. And so to have Ban be only like 6 years old or something, 5 or 6 years old, would absolutely that works. That makes sense.
But he loved him before he became popular.
Right. That's exactly it. I mean, do we want because we could do that either way. I mean, we could have him have a wife and kids, who survived Esgaroth. Yeah.
Well, for that matter, we could have it be Bard's wedding we do at this thing.
Finally. Oh, man, yeah. Again, then he would be like on the full Theodred path at that point.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hey, he's turning 40. Oh, good.
Well, I don't know. I'm a little bit mercenary about this. My feeling about it is what's going to work for the story. In other words, what's going to work for what we need to be tying to in our main story.
Right. We are gonna get, of course, a wedding in the main, the Galadriel and Celeborn wedding, which is a big deal. But it's the parallel to that needn't be a wedding, right? I mean,
right. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. The dynamics of the Galadriel and Celeborn story, as we're contemplating them, are much more about like forgiveness and healing than they are about They are about romance per se.
Of course. On the other hand, so far we don't have any females in the frame, which isn't. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying.
It's kind of hard when you're dealing with the old Hobbit cast,
Although, for all we know, there may be female dwarves walking around, right? I mean,
right.
We're not.
Yes. And there's no reason we can't bring the female dwarves out to the party, right? Surely they would come out from underground for an event like this.
I would think so.
There
will
could
be females running. I mean, there's going to be females in the group, in the extras. I mean, they're going to be doing things, so we don't need to like stretch ourselves. Yeah,
right.
So no, I agree with you. So yeah, so I think I don't know. I don't have a strong feeling either way. I mean, I think either a child, or maybe even a tween.
Bard would certainly have a queen by now, one way or another. Bard is obviously going to have a queen by now.
Would.
So that certainly gives us a female character, like an obvious justification to introduce a female character who was not introduced in The Hobbit, right? We don't have to just sort of hatch a new female character from scratch. I mean, again, like Bard will have had a wife, so there we are.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so, but yes, Bard is the host of this celebration. So yeah, this is going to be having him be I don't think that having Bilbo come in with the dynamic that I was the storytelling dynamic, have him be the impetus for the storytelling, as well as sort of this voice for forgiveness and real community. I don't think that undermines Bard's role, because Bard is still the one who is like literally bringing everyone together. Like because both of them, Bard has established good relationships with the dwarves in the last 7 years, right? That they've been living together. Bard and the Elven King have been buddies since the Battle of Five Armies, right? So neither one of them, neither the dwarves nor the elves, would have answered the invitation of the other, as I said before. But both of them are willing to answer Bard's invitation. So Bard is the only reason that, Bard and the Men of Dale are the only reason that this celebration is happening at all. This multiracial celebration is happening. The dwarves would doubtless be holding their own ceremonies, and I'm sure they actually still are holding their own private ceremonies, because they would, right? But Bard would still be the center point, even if then Bilbo comes in and and I kind of like this idea of Bilbo and Bard having some moments, right, where the two of them are kind of like allies on the, Bard is the one who, as the host and the king, the local king and everything, he is kind of like dealing with them as peers and even in a sense above them because he's their host, right? So there's a certain degree of authority he has because it's his house that they're squabbling in. So he has therefore the moral standing to tell the Elven King and the dwarves to knock it off if they start arguing with each other in his house. So he's kind of coming from above. Bilbo is kind of coming from below, and so the two of them being kind of allies, and kind of working.
That wasn't a height joke, was it?
What?
That wasn't a height joke, was it?
That wasn't a height joke. No, that wasn't a height joke. As I'm sure Thranduil is taller than Bard, but
I'm sure. So I regretfully am going to have to back at client request. I hate to do this.
Oh, right. You've got to back out. Right.
I do want to say one thing before I go. There must be toys at this celebration.
Toys. Oh, marvelous toys. Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Yes. Uh-huh. And with Bilbo taking notes.
With Bilbo taking notes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And also I would insist on Bilbo using the phrase "a party of special magnificence" at some point in the frame. That would seem to make sense.
Absolutely, it has to happen.
Yeah. So having this actually be a foreshadowing of Bilbo's own party, or like the model for Bilbo's own party, is kind of fun. Actually, yeah. No, that's a wonderful suggestion. Okay, thanks, Trish.
Thanks. See you next time.
Okay. All right. Now we're not stopping. We're gonna keep going. Trish has got to bow out, but we're gonna keep going here. So, now here's one of the other issues then that I'm thinking. One of the other issues with the frame is we need an eyewitness. Thranduil, I don't think will work for that, because Thranduil is a comparatively young elf. At some point, we're going to need to introduce his dad, Orifer. But I don't think that we can have him, because we weren't going to introduce him, at least not until much, much later. I could imagine introducing a young Thranduil perhaps in the Fall of Doriath, but I don't think before. And even his father Orifer, I would think, would probably only be introduced there. I'm thinking Thranduil might even wait until the Second Age. So Thranduil himself cannot be can't be our living memory of the first age, our like chief storyteller. Dwarves can tell like of dwarvish traditions. They would know better, for instance, the story of the dwarves and the petty dwarves, and of course some lovely elf dwarf conflict there, right, as they're telling the stories of those, like the Nargothrond story and the interactions between the elves and the dwarves, and they would have some different takes on that. Yeah. Okay, so sorry. Yeah, so we're looking at some of these things. Okay. Right. Sorry, Marie was reminding me to advance to the next slide because a lot of this stuff is here. Yeah. So again, I think it's important. We've got elves, right? We need a living memory. So I was asking myself, Marie and I were talking about this past weekend, and I was asking myself, okay, we need an elf of Mirkwood to have been there in Beleriand. So I was trying to think, who could it be? We need a named elf. My first thought was, bear with me here, what if we invented a female wood elf, right? just kidding. I was totally tempted, by the way, totally tempted to go there just out of spite. But I'm totally not going to do that. And yes, Phil, it can't be Cyros because he doesn't make it, right? He definitely doesn't make it. So here's the idea. We need a named character who can be still living with Thranduil and would be older than Thranduil, so he needs to be a kind of mentor advisor figure to Thranduil, therefore, logically. We have very little to work with as far as named elves. I mean, Tony, you're right. Galleon the Butler is our only other option there. And I'm not a big fan of that idea. I'd kind of rather come at it from the other direction. We can have Galleon the Butler come in at some point, but I don't want to bring in... I don't think Galleon the Butler is a big enough character to come in much sooner than the War of the Last Alliance, essentially. I mean, we'll bring in Galleon the Butler then, but I can't see having him seeing him come in before then. One suggestion that's been made a few times on the discussion boards by Fay Livrin is Celeborn's brother. Celeborn had a brother, or at least Tolkien at one point speculates about Celeborn having a brother, but he never gets written into any narrative anywhere at all. And I found this a kind of an interesting idea. So here, bear with me here. Here's my train of thought here. What if Celeborn's brother... and no, it's not Elmo. I have said again, I am not changing my mind. We are not having Elmo in the story. No elf shall be named Elmo. That's like my tiny little version, right, of like Christopher Tolkien's no adaptation of the Silmarillion will be made while I'm alive, right? As long as I draw breath, there will be no elf named Elmo in Silm film. So there we are. Phil, I'm totally okay with Rog, but not with Elmo. Yes, absolutely. Anyway, so Galathyl is the name of Celeborn's brother. But anyway, okay. So again, here's my train of thought here. Again, it needs to be somebody old, right? So somebody who was around. My first thought was to think about, are there any of the named elves currently in Beleriand that we're talking about that we could repurpose in this way? You know, somebody who could survive the events of the First Age and end up in Mirkwood with Thranduil. And I had a really hard time thinking of anybody there because most of the people we know where they die. I mean, like if you go through, it's got to be a Doriath elf. I mean, I think that seemed fairly like somebody associated with Doriath. Like it can't be a Noldo, right? That's obviously impossible. So all of the Noldor are out, which means we only have a handful of options, right? We have the Sindar options, and we have only had 2 named green elves. Well, 3 named green elves, including Lenwë originally. Denethor's dead, and Cyros is the only other, and he's going to go, right? So neither of those obviously are options. One of them's obviously dead. So, and Círdan's folk, Marie, I agree, they would also theoretically be candidates, but we have very few named ones of those. Those are actually the two that I was thinking of. Like my very, very first thought was, what about like Galdor or Arestor, right? From the Council of Elrond. But the thing is, again, they one of them ends up attached to Círdan, and the other ends up attached to Elrond, right? So they kind of don't do any good. We'd have to repurpose them. We'd have to steal them away from the roles that they're actually given in the Lord of the Rings and say, oh no, like they're in Mirkwood instead. Yes, they travel around, so you could be like, well, Arestor was in Mirkwood like during that time, but since then he's moved to Rivendell. Whatever. Anyway, so it's possible. It's possible. But I kind of like the Celeborn's brother idea for a couple reasons. Reason number one, he is old, right? I mean, Celeborn, we've made Celeborn into a Quevianan elf, so he could have a long perspective on this. And so he would be super useful. Having somebody with that long a perspective would be very useful, not only because he would be able to tell the stuff that was happening there in Doriath and whatnot, but he would also remember, like he would have known Eöl back in the day, right? We also had Eöl at Quevianan, you may remember. So he would like remember some of the Avari. He would remember Eöl. He might have, there's no reason we, couldn't say that he knew Eöl personally. So it gives him the opportunity to be a source for almost all of the Elvish stories that we need to tell in this season, which is attractive by itself. Here's the other thing. My other suggestion. My other suggestion here is that. Oh, sorry. I just saw this. Tony's suggestion. The female elf whose name you can't remember from the children of Húrin who defended Túrin. Nelius? Isn't that her name? Correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who remember more clearly. Nillas. Okay, I know it's close. Nillas, yeah. That's an interesting idea, Tony. It doesn't feel right, though. Here's why it doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel right to me because of the role that she has in the court. If Nillas were a Quevianan elf, she would have a certain stature in Doriath, which Nillas clearly does not have in the text. Yes, childlike is exactly right. I was going to say she seems young and is treated like she's young, but you're right. It's more than, Marie, it's more than young, it's childlike, right? Yes, I think that she should be a quite young elf. That seems to fit the character that she's given much better. Now, we could have Nilla survive, right? But again, I'm not sure. It could be made to work. It could be made to work. Yeah. But no, I mean, I'm thinking she's really young at the time of Túrin's story. Okay, so Tony, here's what I'm thinking here. I want to preserve Nellis's youth. I would like to make Nellis young by Elvish standards, by almost anybody's standards. One of the really interesting possibilities for the Nellis Túrin story, or the Nellis Túrin chapters of the Túrin story, I should say. Every other example, almost every other example of elf-human romance, with the exception, well, no, not with the exception of Andreth, all of them, right, are the elf is great, high, and experienced, and the human is young and like reckless and naive. Like that's how it works, right? The Nellis and Turin story is like the only example that I know of an elf-human love affair, like, whether it's requited or not, love interest, I should say, perhaps, in which the elf is like the junior partner, right? Turin has stature that Nellis does not have. Nellis looks up to him. Has that ever happened? Do we have any other elf human love interest where it's the elf that's kind of looking up to the human as like the senior party, right? That doesn't really seem to me like it would. It doesn't seem to me like it would fit, or it doesn't seem to me like it fits anything else. It seems to me like the only time that happens, and that's interesting. I like that. So, I mean, I'm thinking of having the Nellis story. I want to preserve that. And so I want her to be young, like maybe even not of age by Elvish standards, right? It could be like, that could be why she's not taken seriously, because she's like in her 30s or something. And therefore not even fully mature by Elvish standards. So when she comes and testifies in Turin's trial, it's like bringing in the testimony of like a 12-year-old or something, or, a 10-year-old. Now, again, it's not exactly a 10-year-old because she's, I'm not wanting to make the Turin Nellis thing creepy. But there is like a hero crush thing that's kind of going on. Anyway, and the point is I want to explore that. So I want Nellis. I think Nellis should be legitimately, genuinely young. I.e., she's not born yet in season 4, I think. But that's a really interesting suggestion, Tony. I hadn't thought of that. She certainly is a Doriath named character that we're going to want to preserve. Okay. All right, Tony, I am not sufficiently disciplined to resist that particular tangent. What would Nellis's future be? She lives, right? We could always kill her off in the fall of Doriath, right? That won't be hard if we wanted to. But we could make her survive. Who could she be? Would we want her to survive? Could we have a role for her later on? We could, Tony. We could make her somebody's wife. Yeah, we could Thranduil's wife, Legolas's mom. That's interesting. Sorry, I'm thinking of Thranduil having issues, But Thranduil would not have personally known Turin, so it would make Thranduil's wife older than he, but that's not a problem. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. But fortunately, we don't have to decide that right now. We have several years before we have to make a firm decision on that. Anyway, okay. Let's let me move on from that tempting tangent to invent a later story for Nellis. Okay. I like how this is shaping up. So anyway, I was enumerating the reasons I like Celeborn's brother for this role. The other thing, so here was my proposed story for Celeborn. So like, we don't want to make we don't want to invent a character like Celeborn's brother, which again, we're sort of inventing, and we're completely inventing in the sense that we know nothing about him apart from the fact that he was speculated to exist and was given a name. Phil, do I like Nellis for this role? No. Yeah, no, I don't like Nellis for this role at all. I like her to be not yet born before the events of season 4 happen. So, okay, all right. But hang on. right, the brother. If we have to invent a character, I would not want Celeborn's brother just to be living in Doriath with Celeborn and be like, hi, I'm like Celeborn's +1, right? Like, that's lame. He would be like, he would feel like a duplication, you know, if we just kind of shoehorned him into Doriath. So here was my thought. What if Celeborn's brother is a green elf? They're old, right? It happened. What if the two of them left Cuivianen together? Celeborn's brother decides to follow Lenwë. Celeborn decides to follow Elwë, right? And they're both Teleri, right? So I mean, they're both brothers, but they choose different paths back in the season 2 choosing of paths, right? So Celeborn's brother having going with so he can come in. Remember, here's another factor that really made this idea attractive to me. We had Denethor and Cyros. We killed off Denethor, and Cyros has been taken to Doriath. So we've got no named green elves in Osiriant, right? Green elves are still in Osiriant, and they're still going to play a role, right? Baron is going to have a relationship with them. Treebeard is going to have a relationship with them. They're going to come in, obviously, in the battle with the dwarves there. We need somebody to deliver the line about being unfriends with the men as they come over, right? Somebody needs to be sitting there talking to Finrod Felagund, saying, could you please inform the men that we are their unfriends, right? We totally need to do that, right? We need a green elf, essentially, right? We need somebody, I think. We can't just have those, you know, Baron interacting with, Finrod interacting with, the men interacting with, like, you know, some, I don't know, like completely generic, unnamed green elves, right? So I think we're going to want a named character to be the sort of totally laid back, non-decentral, you know, the sort of decentralized leader, or at least sort of spokesperson for the green elves of Osirian. They don't take a king, right? They don't have nobody takes Denethor's place. But we need somebody to show up on screen to talk, right? Somebody who can be, at least, as I say, the spokesperson for the green elves in Osirian. Celeborn's brother could do that, right? So he would fill a role in the later story, right? He would know of the events because he's Celeborn's brother, and in the later ages he doesn't have to be personally involved. He could be at the Merith Adderthad. Why not? He could come, right? We have some green elves show up and he could lead them, you know, he could be among them anyway, at, you know, the Feast of Reconciliation. So that's fine. And yeah, so we could have him tangentially involved in some of the events, but more importantly, connected, having close connections. Because remember, by being Celeborn's brother, there's all kinds of reasons why he would know all the Noldor stories too, right? Because he would have hung out with Galadriel and Celeborn, especially if he lives in Mirkwood, like in the Third Age. He's living in Mirkwood and they're living down in Lothlorien. It's not so far, right? I'm sure he comes to visit occasionally, right? Catch up on old times. So he would know. So there is somebody who would know, who could know everybody. He could know Eöl, he could know what's going on with the Green Elves, he can know what's going on with the Sindar, he can know what's going on with the Velothrim, he could know what's going on with the Noldor, right? He has all the angles as far as that is concerned. He'd be at Celeborn and Galadriel's wedding. Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, why not? So anyway, so having him be there, but again, he'd be one of the green elves. And then remember, of course, it would make sense that he would end up with Thranduil, whose people are green elves, right? So we're going to need, obviously, to invent a story, which I'm thinking, of course, is going to be a story of how Orifer and Galithil, Celeborn's brother, get together, right? The two of them should become friends and allies, so that's why he ends up going with Orifer and supporting Orifer, and he would therefore, the question which sometimes people ask me about things like, so why is it that the Sindar go back and rule the Sylvan Elves, right? Why is it that you've got all these Sylvan Elves being ruled by this like Sindar ruling family? How did that happen? Galithil is how that happened, right? You know, that I think that he would be a big part of why that came to happen. So we could it make to me it makes all kinds of sense having him involved here. Having him involved to me actually solves a bunch of problems. It seems to me the perfect solution to the eyewitness question. Sets things up interestingly later on, solves some future problems, like again, who's the dude actually in conversation with Baron and with Finrod. So I think this is cool. So I love this idea. So that's my concept, bringing in Celeborn's brother. Now, question. There are some people who might be hostile to this suggestion, and I don't know if I have helped make Faelivrin happy by taking up her suggestion. I might undo that happiness by this suggestion, perhaps. Is there a reason Celeborn's brother couldn't be a girl? I mean, do we need, if we're going to invent a new character like this, is there a reason it needs to be masculine? I'm not sure I see a good reason. I mean, it's not like Celeborn's brother is like super canonical, right? I mean, he's kind of extra canonical. Tolkien never wrote a story about him, right? Okay. He's meant to be Nimloth's father. Okay. So we want to insert him into the family tree. And so his... Okay. Maria, I would accept genealogy as a reason. I said, do we have a reason to make him a boy instead of a girl? Or a reason not to make him a girl? Genealogy is a reason. That's a reason. Is it a sufficient reason? Well, maybe it is. Yeah. No, I mean... One problem with doing film on Friday mornings is that I'm almost always... So, I don't get a lot of sleep during the weeks because I do a lot of my work at nights, and I get up early in the morning to take my kids to school. I usually try to catch up on sleep on Saturdays. Like, Saturday morning is usually when I sleep in to, like, catch up on sleep. So Fridays, I'm often a little fuzzy. And one of the consequences is I'm having... I'm having one of my fuzzy moments, which I'm going to attribute to sleep deprivation. Help me with Nimloth's role in the genealogy. Like, yeah, couldn't it be Nimloth's mom? Is there a reason we can't have that? Do we know? Yeah, Nimloth is Dior's wife, right? That's what I was remembering. But I'm like, we don't actually know either of her parents, do we? It's not like we know her mother, and therefore she needs a father. Okay, right, fine. So let her be Dior's mother-in-law instead of Dior's father-in-law, right? It's okay, right? Okay, so genealogy is a reason, but in this case, the genealogy wouldn't seem to mandate it. So, yeah, and kind of fun, isn't it? Right? I mean, think of that. Think of what... Like, we could give Bilbo a moment, right? When Bilbo realizes that this is Elrond's, what? Great-grandmother? Or something like that, right? I mean, anyway, it would be kind of cool, right? For him to have this moment where he realizes... this character whom we might need to rename with some other tree name, but anyway, to have if we to have that moment where Bilbo realizes that this is a person who is in the direct lineage, right, of Elrond and Elros, because of course he or she is very low key, historically speaking, right? This would be one of the things. Remember, this is the like non-leader of this sort of benignly anarchical society of the green elves of Alciriend, right? Who don't take a leader. So you know, that's like the culture, right? Galathiliel would make it feminine. Okay, sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so I would suggest, I'd be interested to see what people on the discussion board think about giving Celeborn a sister instead of like turning Celeborn's non-canonical brother into a sister instead. I just, on the principle that if we're going to be inventing characters and bringing them in, you know, I'm not saying they all have to be women, but that seems like a good opportunity. Yeah, Tony was saying it's why you like Nellis. I know, I get that. And that's why I really paused over that, Tony. I mean, I had my first reaction was like, no, it can't be Nellis. And I had to kind of think that through to make sure that there was a good reason. And I do think there's a good reason why it can't be Nellis. But that was interesting, I think. Yeah. Anyway, okay. All right. Yeah. So anyway, so I like this. I think this works really well. We've got storytelling opportunities. We've got a person who can be a primary storyteller. We're going to get dwarf points of view on this. You know, on you know, on the from the point of view of their history, we can have applications of this and talks about reconciliation. But notice, nothing's gonna happen, right? We're not going to have a plot heavy frame like we had last season, right? That was the biggest challenge of last season's frame, is that it was very story. It was a dramatic story that was happening in the frame. We're not going to have a story. It's going to be a bunch of people talking in different combinations. There will be tensions. There will be issues. There will be an event, but it's not going to be. It's not going to be a big plot that's happening. So I think this is awesome. I think it's going to work perfectly. I'm super excited about this frame idea, and we'll be talking about this as we go through and making some decisions here. Okay. In the light of that, let's talk about plans for the season. Let me kind of lay things out, because we're going to need to approach this differently. First, let me remind you of how we've approached seasons over the last couple of years. So the last few seasons that we've done, we've approached like this. We've done a sort of a brief overview planning, a couple brief overview planning sessions at the beginning if there's some sort of major issues that we need to hash out before we get started. We do that at the beginning. But then we launch into going through episode by episode. You know, so we do an outline, then we go through episode by episode, make some adjustments perhaps as we go, but we mostly know and agree upon the general outline before we begin. Then we march through one session per episode for all 13 episodes. Then at the end, we do our sort of post-production review of some of the creative work that people from our discussion boards have been contributing. So things like sets and props and costuming and casting and the music and all that kind of stuff that we do there at the end. And then, of course, we also talk about the detailed script outlines. We go back and review those. That's been the shape of this all the way through. Last time I was suggesting that I think we're going to have to do things a little bit differently this time. And ultimately what it comes down to is that in season 4, we're making up more stuff, right? You know, we are entering the part of the Silmarillion where we have fewer events. That is like just, there are fewer things happening. This is just a Valerian and its realms, right? So there are things that occur, but most of the individual stories, like the conversations and things and the individual events, is a lot of stuff that we are having to extrapolate on. Some of it quite a bit on very little data. In particular, like the storyline we want to do with the dwarves, the dwarves and the petty dwarves, especially the story of Galadriel and Celeborn, which even in all of his revisions about Galadriel and Celeborn, we got very little about Galadriel and Celeborn getting together. And sort of the story behind their marriage. So anyway, so there's a lot of work that we have to do just in creating storylines. Last few seasons, we basically had the primary storylines. We had to fill in a lot of stuff in season 1, but even that felt different because we still had major events mapped out that we knew needed to happen. And it was a question of, you know, there it was like characters we need to introduce, but we had more events that we were trying to connect. Here we have fewer, and that's going to be a lot of fun. But as I said last time, I'm very uneasy about just kind of artificially mapping out an outline, because many of these plot threads, these storylines that we're wanting to develop, are going to be developing over multiple episodes. So here's what I want to do. Here's the new plan for the season. Starting next session, what we're going to move to is what I suggested last time. I want to talk about each storyline in order, right? And this is still a sort of officially pre-planning. So I want to work out in detail storylines like the Galadriel and Celeborn storyline, right? Let's talk about the whole thing. What are the things that need to what's the shape of it? What are the things that need to happen? The kind of moments, the kind of events, right? That bring that storyline together. We won't worry yet about like which episode in the season each event will come in necessarily. We'll just sort of say, here's the outline of this plot, of this storyline, right? And what needs to happen there. And then we'll do the same thing for all of the other storylines that we want to follow. Then having done that, having outlined each individual storyline, we will then go through and assemble stuff into episodes for the whole season. And I think that I want to try to do, since we will have already discussed the storylines themselves, I think, and of course I may end up be regretting this later, I think that we can do multiple episodes per session there, because we will have already talked through the storylines, which is usually what we're doing that takes so long in working through each episode. I think that it should be possible for us to do 2 episodes per session. So we're going to have, I'm not sure how many storyline sessions. I really don't know how long that's going to take, so I'm not even going to project. We're going to have several storyline sessions for the next few sessions. Then we're going to have sessions where we discuss 2 episodes apiece. But we're going to, in between, we're going to put a separate buffer session. In which we talk about some of the particular creative challenges, theme, frame, casting descriptions, and stuff. Here's one of the goals of this. I want to do more work on the front end. One of the things that I sort of realized last season, and in conversations with Marie and kind of touching base with how things function really among our creative community, I want to make sure to give more guidance earlier. So like, for instance, one illustration, one example of this is casting, right? So last year, when we do the casting episode, that's really one of the first times, when we go through and we're reviewing the actors and actresses that won the casting elections for each role, it's really one of the first times that I go through and say, well, let's think about like what Caranthir should look like, right? I never really thought about it during the season. And then we get to the end and people make suggestions, and I'm looking at these guys and I'm like, yeah, none of those guys are Caranthir to me, right? And it's really the first time that I've thought through something like a casting call, right? What should Caranthir look like and be like? What do I want out of Caranthir as an actor? And, so Marie was asking me very sensibly, wouldn't it make sense to kind of do that first before we have people nominate and vote on the actors and actresses? And that makes a lot of sense to me. And in addition, I think it would be really good for us to do some kind of earlier discussion and sort of specific, to make sort of some specific calls or sort of assignments to our creative people. To be able to, so this is what we're going to do in these buffer episodes. So we'll do the plot lines, our storyline discussions. Then we'll outline the episodes. We'll bring this stuff together and we'll decide, okay, here's what we're going to do in episode 1 and episode 2. Then after that, we will have in our buffer session, we're then going to look back over episodes 1 and 2, and we're going to identify some of those some of those factors, right? We'll go back and we'll think about any new characters that get introduced in those episodes, any new casting that we have to do, and we'll do our casting call. We'll think about any sort of creative issue that comes up there, like, to throw a random example out that I know will come up. Petty dwarves versus regular dwarves, right? What are they going to look like? What should be the difference visually between how do we want to represent the petty dwarves versus the regular dwarves, the non-petty dwarves, the petty dwarves versus the mountain dwarves. So anyway, I want to take that buffer episode to think through some of these individual details. That way, also, of course, one of the other consequences of this is we don't have to get bogged down in those questions during our episode planning discussions when we're outlining the episodes. Then we can see Brie exactly. Then we'll have a series of assignments for you, right? As we go along. So we'll do episodes 1 and 2, and then we'll say, okay, from episodes 1 and 2, we'll come out of those episodes with lists, right? We want pictures of these things, right? We want designs for these things. We're going to need musical themes to cover this concept or these people. We're going to need, and we can talk about what we want there. We're casting for these characters. And so we can be accumulating those as we go along so that it'll be easier when we get to the end of the season to go back and sort of review those lists of things that we asked for and see what people came up with, right? And other suggestions that that people had. So that's the plan for those things. It will also give by interspersing those buffer episodes between our discussions. So we'll talk about episode 1 and 2, then we'll have a buffer episode about that content. Then we'll do episodes 3 and 4, and then we'll do a buffer episode on that content, and so on all the way through the season. This will also give the script discussion, the script outline team, the script writing team, a little more time. We won't kind of do the outline of the episodes and then sort of say, here, do all this all at once. Another thing that the buffer episodes might help with is if we need more time to think through the frame for those episodes, we can also have that spill over. Anyway, it's all kind of flexible, but in this way, it's going to be a little different. I think that we can make that all a little bit clearer. My hope is that also script outline team, I don't know if you guys think we'll be making your job easier or harder. We're likely to do more of the work for you as we're going through and outlining episodes a little more carefully, I think, than we will have in the past. So you'll have less leeway, perhaps, than you might have had in the old days. I don't know if you will feel in the end that that's a good thing or a bad thing. But anyway, it should be cool. So let's think through the storylines. The last thing we need to do before we go here is sort of decide on a list of storylines that we want to cover. And some of these are ones we've already talked about. So the Sindar reaction to the news of the kinslaying, like that's a major plot line. And I would put the Galadriel and Celeborn story. It's not quite a subplot of that, but it's in conjunction with that. I mean, the issue, the kinslaying, looms large over both of those things, right? The dwarves and the petty dwarves. These are obvious ones that we've already talked about. I have no question about those. Eol. I like having an Eol line. Now we're not going to do the full Eol plot, the Eol and Arthel plot, until season 5, of course, now, but that's okay. We can still, I think we should still introduce him. And especially given his connection with dwarves, that seems to me to be easy enough to do, right? We can think about, he's connected to the dwarves. He's connected to Doriath through the transaction he needs to have with Thingol. That stuff I think that we can do. But I think it's important that we set up Eol and the kind of person that he is. He can serve as a foil to many others. I mean, we were talking about this before. He's kind of like Turgon, except he's like the twisted version of Turgon, the one who goes off in isolation instead of going off in community. He's kind of like Thingol, except he's not like Thingol, right? I mean, so having him there for the sake of being a sort of a parallel and a kind of cautionary tale, I think is super helpful. But we also want to make sure that when Arthel shows up on his front doorstep in season 5, we already have his backstory.
we know who this dude is. We can't only then be like, we can't have her show up at the doorstep of some dude and we're like, yeah, let us explain what's important about this. So the Aeol plotline is not going to be one of our biggest storylines of season 4 by any stretch. It's going to be one of the minor ones, but I do think that it definitely needs to happen. Sauron, absolutely, the villains. We need to have the villain storyline. Especially the catch and release elf captive program. I would also add, remember the storyline that we were talking about with Gothmog leading the useless battle, right, that gets fought closer to the middle of the season. Useless from the bad guy's point of view, of course. The Dagor Aglareb. So we need to have that integrated in. The concept of the temptation of humans, right? So like Melkor absenting himself during that time. So those things we need. But I agree, especially this sort of the corruption and manipulation of elves. The spell of bottomless dread needs to be deployed, right? So we need to work that out. So Fingolfin as High King and the Feanorians. I'm tempted to look at the Noldor kind of together. I think we can discuss them together. They're sort of separate. I don't know. Maybe we can talk about Fingolfin and the Feanorians separately. We definitely need. We threw out some concepts for the Feanorians in the last session, talking about Amros especially, and the kind of the different dynamics and what Maedhros' plan is, and his outlook and all that kind of thing. So we can do that. But we need to take the time and figure out where we're going to be establishing this. I think I want to include Fingolfin as part of this, because sort of Fingolfin as High King and his, so the Feanorians as one part of the picture of where, like what's up with the Noldor, essentially, there. Particularly since we're going to have the Noldor as a whole are going to be related to the Sindar and the news of the Kinslaying, right? That storyline is going to be important. But remember also we've got Turgon and Finrod. We've got to establish Turgon and Finrod. And this, it just seems to me part of the whole picture, right? Like Fingolfin as High King, where is he and what is he doing and what is his outlook? The Feanorians, we talked about a little bit about their internal politics, but we need to think about their continuing relationship with Fingolfin and the others of the Noldor. We need to have Turgon and Finrod, right? Not only just in the having of their dreams, but we need to establish Nevrast and therefore develop Turgon's character a little bit, and how does he end up as the center of that particular community? So I'm thinking. Yeah, Maria, I'm thinking we probably consider this as something I like. That Noldor internal stories thread is kind of the way that I'm thinking of all this stuff. Because, of course, all of this is then related to, sort of collectively, all of this connects to, like, the Noldor side of the whole kinslaying scandal, right? And how the Noldor, collectively and differently individually are reacting to Thingol's ban of Quenya and all that stuff. So anyway, I think that can all kind of come together. Círdan is a great question. The rebuilding of the Falas, the cities at which we destroyed, right, in season 2, or season 3 rather, it can be a thing. I'm not sure what I want Círdan to do. Obviously he's involved in the Sindar reaction to the news of the kinslaying plot. He's part of that story. Do we want Círdan to have a separate story? I'm not sure what it would be. We've already got a lot of storylines in this season. I'm not sure if we need Círdan the Shipwright, other than to have, maybe we can just kind of work that into the Sindar reaction, like work into that the fact that they've reestablished their havens, and are continuing their, shipbuilding thing. The other that occurs to me, but again, it's pretty minor, like Círdan, we do want to reestablish the Green Elves. If we brought the Green Elves to the battle in season 3 and we got most of them slaughtered by the orcs, and then we brought Cyros and probably a contingent. I would think Cyros wouldn't be the only Green Elf in Doriath. That could leave the impression that the Green Elves are gone, right? We need to make it clear that Green Elves remain in Osiriand. So having Celeborn's sister or maybe brother there among them, and their spokesperson, and with some of them showing up at the Marath Adorthad, I think that would work. Yeah. But again, that's more of a, we need to establish a simple fact, namely that there are Green Elves in Osiriand, right? The Green Elves of Osiriand don't have much to do yet, but we'll want them there. We'll want to have established them when the humans come over the mountains, right? Because that's a little bit of a big deal. Anything else? Oh, yes, there is something else. Luthien. We wanted Luthien, more Luthien, right? We need to establish Luthien as a character and give her something to do other than sitting around looking pretty and occasionally dancing. Yeah, Luthien. So what is Luthien doing? I don't know if that necessarily... Tell you what, this is what I want to do. I want to save that one till the end, because that might... all of these that I'm putting, Círdan, the Green Elves, Luthien, all of those get put at the end because we might solve those problems earlier on, right? When we're talking about the Sindar reaction to the news of the kinslaying and stuff, we may decide that we can settle up Círdan, the Green Elves, and maybe even Luthien as roles within those storylines. David was saying he pictured Luthien as a diplomat in the last session. Yes, I was imagining Luthien being at the Marath Adorthad in the last session. David, you know what I just thought of? That line, and I don't know why I'd never thought about it this way. It's one of those things that I think of, and it seems pretty obvious in retrospect. But remember that line that Aragorn delivers when he meets Arwen for the first time, right? And he jokes about Elrond keeping her locked in his hoard, right? He's like, how did I not know you existed? Like, how did that happen? I've lived here for years. Like, did Elrond keep you locked in his hoard? And I never really thought about that as a sort of sidelong shot at Thranduil, essentially, right? Or not Thranduil, a sidelong shot at Thingol, for keeping Luthien locked, because Luthien kind of does get kept locked up in Thingol's hoard, or at least he tries to do that. And there is a general sense of Luthien not really going out at all, which I don't want to perpetuate. So I kind of want to let her out of the hoard, especially since, she has like a continental reputation, right? When she does get out. But there's reasons why Sauron has heard of her, when he meets her. But I don't know. We've already solved that problem by having her be involved in the thwarting of his spider plan in Doriath. But anyway, yeah, Luthien. Okay, so we need a role for Luthien. So let me see. Sequence. Let's start with the Sindar reaction to the news of the kinslaying, because that's the biggest, most overarching plot line all the way through here. Then let's do the dwarves and the petty... No. Let's do Galadriel and Celeborn then, because that's like a corollary to that one. So we do the Sindar reaction to the news of the kinslaying, then Galadriel and Celeborn. Then we do... Then we do the Noldor. The Noldor internal plot lines. And by that time, we will have done... the Sindar reaction and the Noldor plot lines are kind of the biggest, most overarching ones. I'm thinking of putting Galadriel and Celeborn in the middle of that because... or in between those two, because they're so closely connected to the Sindar reaction. So I think I would want to do Noldor first and then go to the dwarves and petty dwarves and then Eol, right? Because he's distantly connected with that. And then I guess Sauron after that. Yeah, that makes sense. I had a brief temptation there to actually talk about Sauron first, so that we could use the plot of the bad guys as the kind of framework into which we could fit everything else. But I think we shouldn't do that. I think we should do Sauron after. So Sindar as a whole, Galadriel, Noldor as a whole, dwarves, Eol, Sauron, and then any other loose ends that we think that we still need to work up. Círdan, Green Elves, Luthien, whatever we don't fit into the other plot lines. Okay, cool. So, for next time, the next scheduled session is November 30th. There's a non-zero chance. There's always a non-zero chance we might need to reschedule if something comes up. But right now, we're planning on November 30th. And we're going to start talking about the Sindar and the reaction to the Kinslaying. So we're going to start working through that storyline. This means that what you can be doing in the next 2 weeks is suggestions along those lines. Don't forget to throw in any suggestions about Luthien or Círdan or the Green Elves that are connected with this as well, because I think this storyline is the one that's most likely to include those, of course. So we'll see. I don't know. Yeah, there's a chance we might reschedule, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen yet. So for now, still tentatively Friday, November 30th. So that's the Friday after Thanksgiving. Thanks everybody for joining us. I can't wait to dig into things a little bit more. We're now done with our sort of pre-organizational stuff and now going to get into really the meat of our storylines for season 4, which I can't wait to do. So more on the Sindar and the Kinslaying for next time. Also a brief call for talent here. Philip Menzies, who is our composer, who has been composing music for us all the way through, which is wonderful. He wants singers. Anyone who would like to volunteer as a singer. He wants to do some choral pieces for he wants voices to be able to use. And you can see the message board for details. He's written out some details there of what he's looking for. But anyone who would be interested in volunteer to sing in some of the film music, there is an opportunity. So get in touch with Philip and we'll see if we can coordinate that. All right. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining me. I look forward to continuing our discussion. But for now, we'll say thanks for listening and Godspeed. Although the theoretical budget of our hypothetical blockbuster may be unlimited, the production budgets of this and the rest of our fun alternative educational projects are unfortunately not. If you have enjoyed joining our production team, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.